Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I need and welcome your support. Thank you all for tuning in. We have got a phenomenal show today. I am so excited about both of our guests. We will be visited by David Hogg, Vice Chair of the DNC and co-founders of Leaders We Deserve. He's announced $20 million in campaigns in deep blue seats to primary corporate Democrats who are not being very democratic and are aligning with Republicans. So we're excited to chat with him. And we will have Dr. Abdul El Sayed running for the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate in the state of Michigan. He's the only candidate that is 100% people funded. I'm excited to speak with him. We are going to go directly into this right after this break. So stay tuned. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll talk to David Hogg, Vice Chair of the DNC. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited about our guest this week, one of two guests. This is, you know him. He needs no introduction, but David Hogg, has been one of the most ferocious young leaders of this country for the last nearly decade. Obviously, survived the horrific mass shooting in Parkland, and since then he has taken the opportunity to lead by example. Launched March with Our Lives, March for Our Lives, one of the most dynamic, globally youth-led organizations. Helped elect Maxwell Frost, the first Gen Z member of Congress, is leading Leaders We Deserve, a PAC and super PAC dedicated to electing young leaders, and is now elected as the youngest vice chair in history of the DNC. David, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
The irony was we scheduled this interview, and then by chance we met in DC at the Substack event, which was kind of cool. So it's good to meet in person. David, one thing I talk often about is I never lose hope in this country because I look at the country's history. And every time this country went down some crappy situation, young people lifted it up. We see the stories of Robert Smalls at 22 years old, stealing a Confederate vessel and helping the North win the Civil War. We see Dr. King at 26 leading the Montgomery bus boycott, Malcolm X, John Lewis, Claudette Colvin, the list just goes on and on. And so when I see you at 25, elected as DNC vice chair, and not sitting silent as a guy who's just as a figurehead, but actually taking the fight, I'm inspired. I want to start with this point you made in your announcement that it's time to go on the offensive. If Donald Trump and his crew think that they can F with our lives, they've got another thing coming. What does going on the offensive look like to you?
Well, I think we've seen a few examples of it in Congress, but we haven't seen nearly enough. Some of those examples look like, Senator Van Hollen not just sitting on his hands and saying, we're in the minority, we can't do anything right now, but literally getting on a plane and going to El Salvador to meet with the man that was, I would argue, abducted by
Yes.
the administration with no due process whatsoever. I think what it looks like is not just coming up with excuses about why we can't do things, but finding things that we can do to show the American people that we are fighting for them. I think right now there's a really big gap between what a lot of the elected leaders of our party want to do and what the base of our party is feeling and what they want. A lot of the elected leaders in our party are thinking we just need to wait until midterms and throw $500 million into a couple dozen races and everything's going to be fine. And of course, we need to defeat Republicans in those races so that we can gain back the House majority and we can at least have one chamber to do something about what Donald Trump is doing. However, the base of our party, they feel alone, they feel isolated, and they feel like they aren't being heard. And
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is close that gap a lot more by showing people what we are doing to fight back. Sometimes that may look like what Cory Booker did, speaking out for as long as he did. Is that going to immediately change everything? No, but at least it shows that we care and we're trying to seize the narrative, right? Because it did for that whole day and it dictated it. And I think what we have to show our country right now is what we are doing to be the party of sanity, to fight back against what Donald Trump is doing, whether it's ridiculous tariffs that he's putting on our economy. We just saw today the GDP to go down, and we're seeing people feel like we're about to enter a recession, if not that we're already in one. And we're seeing the largest cuts to things like Medicaid and attempts at cutting Social Security and more
Yeah.
all over right now, and we need to put up a better fight against that.
You've pledged $20 million to primary corporate Democrats. Bold move. I love it. It's obviously pissed off the party establishment.
Totally.
I will say this is a party establishment that has the lowest approval rating in history. At 21%, Democrats are even worse than Republicans. And when you're losing to a fascist party, you should stop and think like, wait, maybe we're doing something wrong. Why are we even worse off than the fascist party trying to take away people's health care? But that's where we are. I know they're not pleased about it. I commend you for standing your ground, and I've got a feeling they're going to come around because they're going to see the popularity that this principle has. But let's talk about specifics. What would you identify specifically that these corporate Democrats are failing to do that's making you say we need to get these guys out and get in some new blood?
I think right now what it looks like is it looks different in every district. Obviously, it's going to be harder to do a ton of town halls if you are a member of Congress in a super large district in a very rural area, for example. For other members of Congress, it's going to be like making sure that they actually show up to their committee hearings and do their job, right? Making sure that they're listening to their constituents, showing them how they're there, showing up at community events. And frankly, the vast majority of members of Congress, even if they don't have the name ID or recognition of an AOC or a Chris Murphy or somebody like that, I would say a lot of them are doing a lot to meet this moment. And those are not the people that we're looking to go after. We're looking to find the ones that are truly failing to meet this moment, that are not showing up, not willing to do the job, or just simply unwilling or unable to meet it. Where there, at the same time, is a young person that is able to meet that moment and run in their district. And part of the challenge with what we're talking about here is that the media has contorted some of what we're doing to say, oh, we're only spending this money to challenge Democrats in primaries. Our organization, Leaders We Deserve, also wants to help defeat the Republican majority in the House,
Right.
obviously. That is part of the reason why we gave the D trip $100,000. Is it because I firmly agree with every single thing that our frontline candidates say? Definitely not, especially on some things like guns. But I understand right now, in this moment of crisis that our country is in, where our democracy is having its foundations chipped at by Donald Trump, we have to win back that House. And that's just one part of the evidence of how serious we are about supporting frontline candidates that are in districts that we have to flip from red to blue, because we're trying to do two things at the same time here. And I think people have given this a false dichotomy where you either are only going to be focused on building the strongest Democratic Party possible, or you're going to be focused on how do you get the majority. We can and we have to do both at the same time. We have to, because the fact that we just lost an election to a convicted felon who attempted to overthrow the government and overthrow the results of the most secure election in American history, and we still lost despite the fact that we had $2 billion,
Yeah.
should cause us serious reflection, because it's not just what our messaging is. Sometimes it is the messenger themselves. And I think
And,
that's part of what we need to change.
and I want to double down to that point that it's not an either or. I think you have to necessarily say if we're going to strengthen the party, we need a better bench, we need a better core. And correct me if I'm wrong, David, but when you're going after these primary seats where a corporate Democrat is not doing his job, these are deep blue seats anyway. These are
Yes.
seats that are going to be won by a Democrat, hell or high water. And it's about making sure that we're not having Democrats who are selling out. And for those thinking that, well, there's probably not that many, I can tell you, I ran for Congress against a Democrat who co-sponsored a bill with Republicans to gut the Americans with Disabilities Act, who voted with Republicans 3 times to gut the Affordable Care Act and remove health care for people with pre-existing conditions. That would mean someone like my daughter, who has a pre-existing condition that is fatal if not treated, would die. Now, for anyone to tell me, well, don't go after him, he probably meant well, is a big middle finger to me and to my family. And to say that
And mine.
and yours, exactly. And to every American family out there who says, hold on a second, what's the point of electing Democrats if they're just going to vote with Republicans in the first place? And I want you to talk about that because I don't think that message has gotten clear. I mean, I've had a few people even say to me, well, if what David Hogg is doing, it may be noble, but it's gonna prevent us from winning the majority. I just want you to clarify this point that you're going after deep blue seats only.
Yes, entirely. And I've said that to the D trip. I've said that to Hakeem Jeffries' team. I've said that to as many people as possible, as many times as possible. The challenge is, people assume that what we're doing here is an axe. They assume that I am, some extreme. I'm just looking to challenge somebody because I don't agree with them. I understand there are people in frontline districts that are going to have different views than I do, and we need to win the House to do that, especially when our democracy is so at stake. I am not looking to challenge people that are in critical purple races that could cost us the House. The only races that we are looking to challenge in are races that I would say are D+9 or more, right?
Yep.
Where it is pretty much a guarantee that a Democrat is going to win in that seat. It's a matter of who it is. And what I want to do is give people the best options possible, or any options possible in these primary elections, to give them the best representation of the Democratic Party. And what we've seen already is we've even seen in the past week or so, multiple members of Congress announce that they're not going to run again, announce
Yep.
that they're retiring, announce that they're stepping down. And what we're trying to do here is this is not even just about age. Of course, some of it is, right? If you are at a certain age where you cannot meet this moment, then you shouldn't be serving in Congress. However, there are young people who suck too. It's not like
Yeah.
you just get above a certain age and then you're terrible. There are
Yeah.
incredible people like Jamie Raskin, who I would argue need to be in Congress, right? That
100%.
have led the fight, against Donald Trump and his dangerous agenda, and are doing an incredible job. And we need to build an intergenerational coalition in Congress. What we're talking about is not out with the old and in with the new. It's about being out with the ineffective and in with the effective. And our candidates with leaders we deserve, they don't take corporate money. They support campaign finance reform. They support gun safety, obviously, because we
Yep.
want to reform the campaign finance system that has empowered special interests like the NRA, big oil, big pharma, and others, so that the American people know that the only interest being represented in DC is their own, is
Yes.
the American people's interest. Because right now, what scares me the most about this is that young people have heard from the Democratic Party over and over again that we need to defend democracy. We need to defend democracy, and we said this the past 10 years. All as kids continued going through school shootings, as they continued facing the student debt crisis, as they continued facing the climate crisis, and so much more. And what I think of what we have to do as a party is show how we are the party of sanity that is using democracy to help the American people improve their lives by fighting back against the special interests that have killed so much of the American dream, and what we are doing to make it so that families like yours and mine don't have to make impossible decisions, acknowledging that the Democratic Party has done great work on that in the past. When my dad got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease when I was in 5th grade, and he faced an early medical retirement, the reason why my family didn't go bankrupt is because of the Social Security system. And
Yes.
then what I realized later on, though, in the final days of his life, was that in the final month of his life last year, his cost of care every day, despite being a Navy helicopter pilot with VA benefits and a medically retired FBI agent, was $19,000 a month.
Crazy.
The only reason why my family did not go bankrupt is because I had to make a spreadsheet to figure out how long we could afford to keep him alive.
Yeah. Well,
Unfortunately, that story is not unique at all. Millions of people are facing that challenge. Millions of people are going to face that challenge over the coming decades in our country. And we live in the richest country in the world. Nobody should have to make impossible decisions like that in a land of plenty like we live in right now. That's why I continue to be a Democrat. It's not because I think we're God's greatest gift or a perfect party by any means, but I believe in what we can be and the party that we can be. And that's what I'm trying to build here. I'm not doing this because I hate the Democratic Party or something like that. It's because I love what we could be and what
right.
part of what we have been, right? Whether it's making sure that people with pre-existing conditions are not kicked off their insurance, or making sure that because you get a diagnosis that your family doesn't go bankrupt. That is part of what has made our country great, is the work that the Democratic Party has done there. We just have more to do. And I believe that right now we have to get better fighters out there to fight for families like mine, yours, and millions of others out there.
Beautifully said, David. If you're just tuning in to speak with David Hogg, Vice Chair of the DNC, and you may know this, but just 31 days ago, my father passed from Parkinson's as well. And
Jesus, I did not. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, it's, you can empathize. You've been there, and very similar. My wife and I sat down and said, okay, how do we afford his care, his treatment, his in-home care? And if I showed you, or, we spent well north of 6 figures in the last year and a half, well north of that, literally everything we had just to make sure he was healthy and happy. And that shouldn't be, I mean, that's not normal. I mean, we're fortunate that we're in a spot that it didn't financially bankrupt us, but for most Americans, that does financially bankrupt them. And it's something that is unacceptable when a corporate Democrat takes money from the same health insurance companies, exploiting our parents exploiting our children and saying, well, that's just the way it is, ignoring that every developed country in the world has healthcare as a human right, except the wealthiest country in the world. It is an absolute outrage. And that kind of segues into my next question. You've said you want the Democratic Party to be more aggressive in fighting for working people. You've talked about some issues, some policies that you want to see passed. What do you see are the 2 or 3 top priorities that you want to focus on in this next election cycle?
So I think that there's an important distinction in our party that has caused a bit of a division where um, a lot of critics that say that we need to move more to the center and that we can't talk about some things, that are more cultural issues, for example, or whatever else it might be, think that, the left side of our party only wants to go out there and campaign on those issues. And I actually don't think that's true. I think that what we need to realize is that what we campaign on needs to be what we legislate on, but there's also more that we can legislate on. But we can't do anything to help protect anybody if we don't have power to do that in the first place. But we also need to make sure that we're actually using that power to protect people when
Right.
we have it and not just banking it endlessly and saying, "Oh, let's just sit on our hands and let's not do anything too aggressive here and not be bold in what we want to do because we want to just conserve our power over and over again when Republicans are doing the exact opposite."
Yes.
And what I would say that what I believe that we should focus on personally in our messaging is basically three things. What are we doing to lower the costs of the American dream? Because it has become financially unachievable for the vast majority of the American people. And what I mean by that is let's make sure that in how we talk about that, it can't just be let's lower costs. Let's lower costs in some very vague way that
Yeah.
doesn't feel real. What it needs to be is exactly what you just talked about with the healthcare costs that you had to pay for your father, or the healthcare costs that I had to pay for, that my family had to pay for my father, right? And how those are impossible decisions that no American family should have to make. We should also be talking about how much it costs to get an education in this country and what our party is doing to ensure that if you want the only limitation to getting a college degree in this country should not be if you're willing to take on 6 figures of student debt, it should be how well you do in school and how hard you are willing to work. That is the
Right.
only limitations that there should be on the American dream is your work ethic and how creative you are, in my view. Um, what are we doing to lower those costs? And what are we doing as well to make sure that you can actually afford a roof over your head, right? All of these things that
Right.
affect everybody, no matter if you're gay, straight, trans, black, brown, whatever it is, everybody needs a roof over their head. They need to have an education. They need to have health care. They need to have so many of these basic essentials, including elder care and child care. What are we doing to lower those costs? So I think that's the first block. What are we doing to revive the American dream? That is the overall picture that I think that we need to paint.
Yeah.
And the way that we do that is we show how we are using democracy to fight back against the special interests that have killed so many elements of the American dream. And the second part to that is what are we doing to fight against the corruption that has killed the American dream? What are we doing to make sure our attorney generals are going after people that are poisoning the American people, corporations that are poisoning the American people, whether it's through pollution, whether it's through predatory housing practices. But right now, there is a cartel of corporations that is out there that are using things like artificial intelligence companies where they put in all their prices to then basically produce the same price for everybody to essentially price fix together that we are
Yep.
not talking about. And in North Carolina, Jeff Jackson actually just did something about this, which was great. And then I think with that, what are we doing to reform the campaign finance system to ensure that special interests do not have nearly as much of a role in our politics as they do right now? And that's something that everybody across the board wants, right? Nobody likes high prices, nobody likes corruption, and nobody likes having corruption within our politics through our campaign finance system. And I think if we do that, and we also talk about, of course, addressing crime and gun violence in particular, so that you have the freedom to know that your child can go to school and come home alive, I think that is a winning message. And when we get elected, we can focus on all that and a whole lot more to ensure that we're not harming so many marginalized communities that Republicans are harming right now.
I love it. I love that you're leading with the economic aspect of it because at the end of the day, the Biden economy was way better than the Trump economy is. There's no doubt about that. And we have to acknowledge that poverty rates increased by 60%. The number of folks who are food insecure increased under the Biden administration. It's not talked about. He signed a welfare reform package, not exactly as bad as the one that Clinton signed, but also destructive and not conducive to expanding SNAP and TANF access when we know that expanding access to those things helps spurn and grow the economy as well. So I love the fact that you're leading with that and talking about these issues of housing, of education, of healthcare is kind of the core fundamental aspect of that. We're down to our last couple of minutes, David. Before you go, two questions. One kind of an esoteric, existential question, and then two very practical. One, what gives you hope? We've just surpassed the first 100 days of the Trump regime. We're seeing the destruction of due process, judges being arrested, people being trafficked and disappeared. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. What gives you hope in these difficult times? And for those who have maybe been on the sidelines or who aren't sure how to get involved or who want to elevate their level of involvement, what do you recommend they do? How do they connect with you and the work you're doing?
What gives me hope? Hope is a funny thing because I obviously, given how my classmates and I got involved in politics after Parkland, I
Yeah,
wouldn't say that the reason why we spoke out is because we were hopeful. Of course, we had to. It wasn't like after Parkland that we said, "Oh yeah, like if we just speak out, things are going to change." Because the everybody in the political establishment was telling us to do the opposite of what we did. They
yeah,
said, "Okay, guys, don't talk about banning assault weapons. That's too radical. Don't talk about taking on the NRA. That's too radical." So what do we do? The exact opposite of that because we weren't cowards and we said what needed to be said. And for us, it wasn't a matter of hope that changed things. It was the fact that things were going to change. And if we weren't going to be able to change gun laws at the time, we were going to change the factors that went into that so that gun laws would change. And we didn't care what people said was possible. We were going to make it possible. And we did because we didn't listen to those naysayers and because we led boldly as young people with our values and didn't just negotiate against ourselves and hide and say, oh, you know what? Let's just ask for the bare minimum when kids are dying in school. We actually did change things in Florida, despite it being a Republican trifecta. We ended up raising the age to buy a gun to 21, and we passed a red flag law that has been used over 21,000 times since the shooting in Parkland. And studies afterward had shown that been at least, conservatively speaking, at least a 10 to 11% reduction directly as a result of the passage of that red flag law, a 10 to 11% reduction in gun homicides. Is that perfect? No, but it's a hell of a lot better than the track that we were on.
yeah,
And what gives me hope is that when I was at a protest a few years ago and I talked to Dolores Huerta and I asked her, what is the most important thing that an activist can know or convey to people in order to make change? She said, you have to make people believe that change is actually possible. Because far more often than not, what stops change from happening isn't whether or not it is actually possible, it is whether or not people believe it is possible. And I think it is incumbent on the Democratic Party in this moment for us to inspire the American people to believe in our country again and what could be possible if we just had a small shift in our values to ensure that we protected everybody across the board so that nobody has to choose between having heat or insulin, right? So that nobody has to choose between going bankrupt or letting their father die
right.
with very uncomfortable health care. Because there are far too many people in this country right now that are having to make impossible decisions that no one should ever have to make. And if history has taught me anything, it's that great generations are not born. They're made in the crucible of awful circumstances. And unfortunately for our generations, there have been no shortage of those. But I
Yes,
know that our young people are going to step up and meet this moment. And if we do not have those leaders right now, they will rise and they will meet this moment. Because time and time again, when people bet against our country, like Donald Trump is doing right now, where he's saying we have to go back, that everything's screwed and nothing's going to get better, people rise up. And when you bet against America, you lose. And in this country, we don't bow to people like Donald Trump that are wannabe kings. We defeat them.
beautifully said. Last thing before you go, David, because that was powerful. I would love to end there, but I want to now channel that energy into what is the one or two actions that you want people to take
Oh yeah.
to rise up to be that movement.
Sorry, counsel. I should have answered your other question.
No, good.
I honestly, okay. So this may sound a bit ridiculous, but truly, um, I think the most important thing that we need to build right now is community.
Yeah,
And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is in my neighborhood in DC, there is when I moved in, there was a ton of trash everywhere. Just it was terrible. So what did I do when I moved in? I just went and I ordered on it online one of the things to pick up trash or whatever. And
yeah,
after work, I would just go around in my suit picking up trash every day for like an hour and just like chat with a friend on the phone. And then all of a sudden my neighbors started coming out because they felt guilty that they, that they weren't helping pick up the
Amazing.
trash, and
That's amazing.
started saying like, here's a dustpan, here's this, or helping me pick up the trash. And then when I picked it all up, you know what I did is I said, you know what, there's a bus stop down the street from me. It's really dirty. So I'm just going to rent a pressure washer and I'm going to pressure wash the bus stop myself, which is so ridiculous. I know, it was very
It's
satisfying.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
amazing.
from meeting all my neighbors that way, what I started to realize was the power of having community around, not only to feel better in this moment and not feel isolated, because there's going to be times when you feel down, where you feel like you're not able to continue doing this work. But what determines success in politics more often than not is two things. It's whether or not you believe change is actually possible, or you're able to convince people of that, and you have the grit and determination to keep going. I've failed so many times, over and over and over and over and over and over again. But the thing is, I get up and I keep going and I keep going and I don't stop. And it's because I have that community around me. And I think in this moment, if people want to be part of making that change, it's great if you pick up trash. But more than that, what I would say is try to become a precinct captain for like your area. Go out and find like, 100 people. And what a precinct captain does is they basically are responsible for their local party of finding like 100 or so people within, 10 or 15 minutes of their front door that they check in with to say, hey, I work with the Democratic Party here. I'm a volunteer. What do you need? How can we help you? And sometimes your neighbor might be like, well, I can't get my social security because they don't let me call anymore because Donald Trump shut down the phone lines, which is how
Yeah.
40% of social security claims are filed. And then you can help them get online to get those social security claims and also inform them that Donald Trump did that and made it such a pain in the ass. If their trash isn't getting picked up, you can help to call their local your city council member and say, "Hey, it needs to get picked up." So that hopefully we are checking in, ideally, I would say 4 times before an election with all of these people, and then you turn them out to vote before the election and say, "Hey, so and so, remember that trash that wasn't getting picked up? We got that taken care of. Now there's this election. Here's how this candidate aligns with your issues. Please make sure you get out and vote so that we can continue advancing this work." I think
I
that is
love it.
probably the most impactful thing that we could do right now.
I love it because you're investing in people. You're showing them you care. You're not just there for their vote. You're there for them as a person, and then they're
Yep.
inspired to want to vote for you. David Hogg, co-founder of Leaders We Deserve, vice chair of the DNC. Love the work you're doing. Love your passion and fire, and wish you nothing but immense success. Hope to have you back on here soon.
Thank you. If people want to learn more about our work, they can go to leaderswedeserve.com.
LeadersWeDeserve.com. We'll plug that when we push this out as well. That is David Hogg, Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee and co-founder of Leaders We Deserve. David, I'm grateful we had time with you today and hope to have you back soon as you continue to build out this amazing platform in holding corporate Democrats accountable. When we come back from break, we will have Dr. Abdul El Sayed. I'm extraordinarily excited to speak with him. He's running for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in the state of Michigan. This is a conversation you don't want to hear. He's the only candidate in the race that is 100% people funded, and we need more of that. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. When we come back from break, we will have Dr. Abdul El Sayed running for U.S. Senate in Michigan. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit subscribe. Extraordinarily excited about our second guest on this week's episode. Dr. Abdul El Sayed is someone I've known for many years. Born and raised in Southeast Michigan, he rebuilt Detroit's health department after bankruptcy, then led Wayne County's Health and Human and Veteran Services Department, serving nearly 2 million residents. He is a physician. He did run for governor in the past, and now he's running for a U.S. Senate and is the only candidate in the race who is not taking money from the billionaires and the oligarchs and AIPAC and all sorts of horrible PACs. He's endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders, Congressman Ro Khanna, and he's here with us today. Abdul, great to be here, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for opening your space to us, and excited to have a conversation about what Michigan and American voters need right now.
One of the things I love about your platform is you really are focused on working families. You're getting away from the culture wars. You're getting away from the left versus right dichotomy and recognizing that we really are all in this together. And I think in after these first 100 days of the Trump regime, we're seeing that his horrible policies are not just hurting blue states or red states, they're hurting all of us. And we need to stand together. Talk about your superhero origin story. What's inspiring you? What's motivating you to get out there and run?
Well, Qasim, I appreciate that. I don't know that I have a superhero origin story, but I can tell you that, you know, I'm proud of my roots. My parents immigrated from Egypt, and I was raised by my father, who came to America because he wanted to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering, and Detroit, Michigan was the best place to do that. And my stepmother, who's a daughter of the American Revolution, and forgive me for being from Michigan, but she's from right here in the middle of the state.
Amazing.
I spent a lot of my summers with my grandmother, my teta Soad, wisest, most intelligent person I've ever met, never got to go to school. She raised 6 kids of 8 to whom she gave birth. Now, when I would go visit her, I'd go 15 hours and travel 10 years difference in life expectancy. But the crazy thing about it is, I didn't actually have to go 15 hours. I could go 15 minutes from where I grew up in Southeast Michigan into the city of Detroit and cross the same chasm. And the
Yeah.
reality of it is that that is the downstream consequence of decisions we've made as a society. I became a doctor because I wanted to do something about it. And I realized that, you know, when you walk into a patient's room, you ask 2 questions. You ask, what's wrong? And how can I help? And what you start to appreciate is what's wrong has a lot more to do with what's happening outside that clinic or hospital than what's happening necessarily in somebody's body, which is a downstream consequence of all of the injustices, all of the unfairness of the way society works. Now, I've been in public service here in Michigan for the better part of 10 years. And when I talk to folks, doesn't matter where we go, if we're in Flint or Oscoda, they're talking about the same set of issues, right? They're asking, why is it this hard to get by in the richest, most powerful country in the world? Why does it feel like I'm constantly losing grip on a job that doesn't even pay me the wage I need to be able to provide for my family? Why are groceries so expensive? Why can't I go to a doctor without worrying about whether or not I'm gonna fall into debt? Why, when I take a big, deep breath of air, am I suspect about what a smokestack from a corporation put into my lungs alongside that breath? Why do I have PFAS or lead in my water? And I'm running because I want to answer those questions. Because again, I became a doctor to ask what's wrong and how can I help. And right now, there's a lot that's wrong. And the last point I want to make on this is this one. Donald Trump was elected in large part because he saw people's pain, but what he's done with it is he has taken it and forged it into the worst kind of cynicism. He inflicts pain on other people so that he can hold it up and say, well, at least your pain's not this bad. And then he can scare them into thinking that he could actually make it worse, because that's exactly what he's doing. And if we're
Yeah.
serious about winning elections, we have to see that pain and we have to do the hard work of forging it into hope. And that's what I'm doing, crisscrossing my state, talking to folks about what hurts right now and about what we can do better. I'm somebody who spent my career building in government, eliminating $700 million of debt, taking on big corporate polluters, making sure folks had Narcan. And that's the work I think we want out of our next U.S. senator. And so we've got to fight back against Trump, but it's not enough to fight back. You've got to fight for a vision that folks want to come together around so we can heal what's hurting and become the best of us.
Earlier on, we had David Hogg, vice chair of the DNC, and he talked about the need to go on the offensive and stop being reactive, but be proactive. And it sounds like you have that same vision as well. A lot of the whys of why we're suffering the way we are is because there's so much corporate money in politics, and so many corporations and billionaires own the politicians that are elected to be public service, but they've turned into private servants. You're going to be facing a pretty steep opposition of people with tons of money from AIPAC, from other dark PACs. What's remarkable about this is that more than 90% of Americans across the political spectrum detest corporate money in politics. They want it gone. They want it out. You're the only one running a people-funded campaign. But the question is, how are you going to build a war chest large enough to take on these massive billionaire-backed politicians that you're going against?
Well, I'll say a couple things about that. The first thing we can't lose sight of is the only power that money has in our politics is to buy ad space, to disinform people about what's in their best interest. And if you're able to sidestep, right, that system where we allow corporations to buy ads, to disinform, if you're willing to go right to the people, you can build the kind of people-powered campaign, because at the end of the day, votes matter more than money matters. At the same time, money does matter. And so I'm not asking big corporations to write me PAC checks. In fact, if they tried, I would send them back. What I am asking is everyday folks to go to our website, abdulforsenate.com, chip us off $5, $10, $15. I know that Donald Trump just destroyed the economy. I know that folks are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to afford their grocery bill. And if you're pissed off about the circumstances that caused that, my ask is that you make an investment in a campaign that is willing to be your voice, your advocate, in a place where too often, too many of the folks who are there are more interested in passing bills on behalf of corporate sponsors than they are in passing bills for you. And that's who I answer to. It's the reason that we've been able to be as clear about the issues facing Michiganders as we are. And I just got to tell you, right? It's interesting, Qasim. You've done this before. When you crisscross your state, you listen to people and you speak directly to their problems. It's like a revolutionary act because, unfortunately, too often, let's be clear, Democrats do this thing where they want to triangulate a message that is perfectly inoffensive to everybody. Most importantly, the corporations that back their campaigns. So they end up saying nothing at all, but they say it very enthusiastically, which just looks ridiculous. And I think voters see past that. So what you get with me is I'm not afraid to call a spade a spade. I'm not afraid to call out the way that corporations and billionaires and oligarchs have been literally buying access to politicians, buying the public policy that's best for them, lining their pockets with ill-begotten gains as a function of public policy that works for them and not us, that leave us feeling monetized with every transaction we engage in. Whether you think about like buying a plane ticket, go see a loved one, right? You're going to fly on one of two kinds of airplanes. You're going to fly in maybe one of 3 to 5 carriers. You think about picking up a phone, right? There are probably 2 manufacturers of that phone, maybe 3 providers, right? And you're looking at 4 different apps. Like this is the way that you've had corporate consolidation and collusion to try and monetize us at every turn of our lives. We can do better, but it starts with a politics that's going to rebuild the firewall between our economic system and our big corporations and our lives and our government.
Yeah, I love the word firewall between corporations and politicians. We absolutely need that. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Dr. Abdul El Sayed, running for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Michigan. Let's talk about the Democratic Party for a moment, because as we've seen the polling, as atrocious as the Trump regime has been, and has as low as his rating has been, and as low as the Republican Party rating has been, by some remarkable circumstance, in part due to your point earlier about trying to triangulate a message that's inoffensive to everyone and then doesn't actually accomplish anything. Democrats have a worse approval rating. They're at 21%. What does the Democratic Party get wrong?
Oh, I think it's less about what the party gets wrong than it is about what it doesn't get right. Right. I mean, I think what's happened over time is that we play not to lose. And, I played sports and you played sports growing up. And the thing about playing not to lose is that all you do is focus on losing. And that's kind of what happens. Like we're losing. And so my question is, are we willing to play to win? And if we're willing to play to win, then we have to be willing to shed the old broken strategy that tells us that if we take corporate money here and then try and launder it with fancy words when we're talking to working people, that somehow we're going to be able to create this alchemy that works and we can win elections. But then we're in a situation where we're hamstrung when it comes to governing because our corporate backers don't want us to do anything that's actually going to solve problems for voters. Right. And meanwhile, we're still saying the same thing to voters. That whole system, that whole strategy needs to be blown up and moved on from. That's playing not to lose. Playing to win is doing the thing you say you set out to do. You go listen to working people. You ask about the challenges in their lives. You pay attention when they tell you what hurts. And then you think through and work through public policy opportunities to actually solve them, that then you go back to them with and start talking about to galvanize and build momentum. And then when you're actually governing, rather than recognizing that you're caught in what is ultimately what amounts to be a sort of a systemic lie, you can actually go about to doing the things that you said you wanted to do. The other thing about it is, look, I played football. I was captain of my high school football team when I grew up. And we talk about smash mouth football, right? And that's when you recognize that your opponent is out there to try and take you out, and you hit them with more than equal and opposite, right? Because you're playing to win. And I think we need to be engaged in some smash mouth politics. What I mean by that is we are, when we put on our D and our blue jersey, whatever that is, we're not fighting for Democrats. Like, the party is a vehicle for the people we say we want to serve. And if we're serious about serving them, then we got to go forward and go on the offensive and start to really push on public policy that holds corporations and oligopolies accountable, that takes on oligarchs, and that serves real people. It really is not that hard, right? I study complicated things, but this is not that complicated. Yeah. The hard part is we've stuck ourselves into a strategy where we try and take corporate money and launder it through messages that don't mean anything to anybody. And then we wonder why we both lose elections. And then even worse, when we win them, we can't actually govern on the values that we say we believe in.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose situation. And I think just to elaborate, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you say not fighting for Democrats, not fighting exclusively for Democrats. We're fighting for all Americans. And that kind of has to be the point here, that we have to get away from this tribalism, culture war mentality. And I think you're doing an excellent job of that. I recall during the presidential campaign last year, the Democrats put out an ad slamming Trump for all the money he's taking from billionaires. And then someone did the math and found out that more billionaires are donating to the Harris campaign than to the Trump campaign. So, you know, you have egg on your face when you make those kinds of attacks, when you're not living your values as well. I want to talk.
Qasim, if I can pick up on that point, right?
Yeah, please, please.
What Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all of their apologists in Congress are doing is flat out awful and wrong. And right now, we got to stand up with all we've got to fight them. But we don't just fight for a party, right? That's the point you were making, I was making. What we're doing is we've got to fight for working people. And
Yes.
the hard part about this is that we can't forget that it's not just about what you fight back against, right? It's about what you fight for. I think there are a lot of people out here that are a little bit confused. They think that if we just went back to 2015, right before Donald Trump went down that escalator, that everything would be okay. No, I mean, he was able to exploit a level of pain and frustration in society that led him to the presidency twice. Okay.
Yes.
And if we're not willing to speak to that pain and that frustration, and we cannot honestly talk about what we want to do to solve it, we're going to have a real hard time. Because look, even after Trump's off, right, we're still going to be in a situation where we've got to take on everything he's destroyed. And we've got to have something we say we want to build. Like, what are we going to build from there? So I just want people to be honest and clear-eyed about the fact that, like, trying to go back to 2015 is just our own version of Make America Great Again. It's just not in the 1930s. It's in like 2015. Like, we've got to make America great, right? And that means literally listening to people, speaking to their pain, and being able to deliver on the things that they want.
You're right. I mean, beautifully said, Abdul. I don't think people realize that even in 2015, the day before Trump came down the escalator, wealth and income inequality was still the worst it had been since the Great Depression. And politicians were ignoring that. And it's just a shame that a billionaire megalomaniac was able to tap into that better than the party that's supposed to be for working class folks. Abdul, you know, as a physician, as an activist, as an American, you've been vocal on the rights of Palestinians, of severe condemnation of the genocide in Gaza. What's shocking to me is polling showed repeatedly during the 2024 election that 77% of Democrats and 63% of all Americans were aligned that we need to stop funding Netanyahu, and yet we see that continue to escalate, see that continue. What's your message to folks out there on what you will bring to the U.S. Senate that doesn't currently exist?
I mean, look, to me, it's common sense, right? I spent my whole career advocating for people to have healthcare. I literally wrote the book on Medicare for all. And every time you talk about this, they say, well, we cannot afford it, right? And, you know, obviously it's the corporations that profiteer off of us when we get sick that want to tell you can't afford it. But then isn't it kind of crazy, Qasim, that we send tens of billions of dollars to a foreign military of a rich country to drop bombs on other people's hospitals and their kids when we should be investing in those things our own? Like, it's actually crazy that that's just not conventional common sense. And there's a reason you don't hear politicians say it the way that I just did, because there's a small group of MAGA-aligned war hawk donors who've tried to literally use their money to silence anybody who's willing to talk about being pro-peace and pro-justice, because there's too much money to be made sending our war material abroad, right, to kill other people. And I just want everybody to understand that, like, when everybody in the country thinks one way and then politicians think a different way, the difference here is somebody's money. And I want you to know who that is. Those are MAGA-aligned donors who are trying to put a chokehold on our politics and decide who wins Democratic primaries. And I'm asking that in my race, right, that every Democrat agrees that we should not be taking money from MAGA folks to beat up on other Democrats, right? And we should be talking about common sense solutions that work for working people. I am running to be senator for the state of Michigan, all right? And in the state of Michigan, I go to public schools all the time, and they look like they're in a state of disrepair. And I ask myself, I wonder what a couple more $1 million could mean for a school like this or a school like that. I talk to voters who send their kids to those schools, and they say these schools, look, they haven't been able to keep up. I talk to teachers who work in those schools, and they say, I got to worry about whether or not my kids are safe in the schools that we concentrate them in most of the day, most of the year. And meanwhile, our politicians want to tell us that it's smarter for us, right, to send our billions of dollars abroad to drop bombs on other kids, their schools, their hospitals. It's nuts to me. And I think that at the end of the day, what you're going to get with somebody like me is somebody who's willing to speak truth to power and speak common sense, because I want our money invested in making kids' lives better, not destroying kids' lives.
And what I love about that answer, Abdul, in addition to it being authentic and genuine, is I don't know how you can disagree with that, whether you are a MAGA or a bleeding heart liberal. That's a common sense answer. We should be investing in our communities, not bombing people overseas. It's a very common sense answer. But we're down to our last couple of minutes. I want to go back to healthcare for a second. RFK, in my view, is wreaking havoc on our health system. And his latest announcement that he's going to either restrict or ban Narcan, in my view, is going to have a devastating impact, particularly on rural communities. You've worked on Narcan extensively. It's been part of your policies for a long time. Can you speak to this and really just share with our listeners what impact this is going to have and what you recommend we do to prevent this policy from going forward?
I just want to be clear. Everybody knows that we're in an overdose epidemic. Everybody knows somebody who's either died by overdose or came pretty close.
Right.
And the idea that we are going to ban a life-saving drug, like if you've ever seen Narcan used, it literally reverses an overdose immediately. A person goes on from literally their death moment into being just fine as if nothing happened. The idea that somehow you would go after that is nuts. But like, here's the problem with RFK. It's like health policy by vibes. And, for those of us who spent a lot of time learning medicine and science, it's kind of nuts to me to see a guy who has no clue what he's talking about have risen to the highest office in in public health. And I'll tell you, what he was able to do is exploit a confidence gap, right? A trust gap that unfortunately too many of us in public health allowed to form. And I think the soul of that trust gap sits in the fact that we in this country have failed to guarantee people universal access to healthcare.
Yeah.
And so when you show up to them in the midst of a crisis and you weren't there when they were struggling to afford their insulin, and all of a sudden you've got this new medication that didn't exist for a disease they don't yet have, they're going to look at you some kind of way. And I think if we're serious about wanting science to be at the fore when we're making public health decisions, we've got to be serious when it comes to showing up for people on the problems they know they have. And that's why I've been such a huge advocate on Medicare for all, because I think the fact that too few people have healthcare in this country is fundamental to the challenges that we face as a society when it comes to trust in public health and healthcare. And now you've got a guy like RFK who's exploiting these problems to push some ridiculous conspiracy theory stuff. And Narcan or antidepressants or anti-vax. At some point, we got to remember that like when you say these things, people listen, and there are going to be people who die as a function of it, and we can't stand for that.
And your book on universal healthcare is a must read. It points out in undeniable terms that not only will it save us absurd amounts of money, it will increase life expectancy, decrease maternal and infant mortality, particularly among Black and brown communities. It's a win-win. The only people that lose are the insurance executives who won't be able to buy their third mansion and fourth yacht. And I think I can live with that sacrifice.
Too bad, so sad.
Too bad, so sad. Abdul, we're down to our final couple of minutes here. I always say that when it comes to a campaign, you need time, treasure, and talent. You have the talent. You're building an amazing team. You want people to invest their time and treasure. Share with the folks listening how they can get involved with your campaign, whether by donating money because you are people funded, or by donating their time and volunteering. How can they get involved?
Yeah, Qasim, I really appreciate it. Look, it's not about me, it's about all of us. My job is to understand the challenges we all face and to hopefully build a movement where we all deliver a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And if you want to be a part of that, I hope that you'll go to abdulforsenate.com. That's abdulforsenate.com. Follow us on socials at Abdul El Sayed, ABDULELSAYED. Get involved, tell your friends, chip us off $5. If you're in Michigan or even not in Michigan, sign up to volunteer. We're going to need your support. If you're in Michigan, I'd love to come to your home. Sign up to host us for a house party. I'd love to talk to folks about what we're trying to build here. Listen to you about the challenges you face and see what we can do around trying to solve them. Qasim, thank you, of course, always for hosting important, critical conversations and for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for being here, Abdul. You're welcome back anytime. We hope to continue to have updates from you throughout the campaign and share those with our listeners. Abdul El Sayed, Dr. Abdul El Sayed, running for the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate in Michigan. Visit his website at abdulforsenate.com. My friends, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. You have my commitment to continue to advance the show that builds on compassion, on justice, and on accountability for those in power. Got another phenomenal show lined up next week. I mean, this was a banger, right? David Hogg and Abdul El Sayed. It's fantastic. But be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View channel 126. And if you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button because that's what helps our content continue to grow and expand and reach new audiences. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.